If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. "I love you," said Wednesday. Luke blinked, unsure of what to say. He hadn't expected that the first thing he'd hear upon regaining consciousness would be those words coming from Wednesday's mouth. "That's unexpected," he murmured, his voice sounding strange and hoarse after so many days without speaking. They weren't a conventional couple. They would give their lives for each other without hesitation, but they weren't the type to express their feelings with words. They didn't say, "I love you," "I care about you," or things like that. Physically, their relationship was different. Wednesday had no qualms about kissing him whenever she wanted, seeking his closeness in intimate moments, letting her actions speak for her. Luke was the same. They were even very active in that area. But never an "I love you." Until today. And Wednesday had been the first, to Luke's own surprise. "Well, if your goal was to leave me speechless, mission accomplished," Luke said, looking Wednesday in the eyes. Luke couldn't help but complain inwardly. He had it planned. Days before, back in Shadowside, he'd already been thinking about the perfect moment to say those words first. But it had to be a moment when he truly felt it was the right time. And with the whole investigation in Shadowside, and then learning about the vampire clan and all that, it felt like there was never a good moment to say it. "I was planning to say it first. You didn't have to beat me to it," Luke complained aloud, feeling the carefully planned moment slip right through his fingers. Wednesday blinked, surprised for a brief moment, before a slight curl of her lips betrayed her amusement. "Planned," Wednesday repeated, her monotone voice tinged with a hint of mockery. "Since when do you take the time to plan something romantic?" "Well, it wouldn't have been some super romantic moment like a fancy dinner followed by a big confession. I just wanted to find the right time. Something that felt right," Luke said, shrugging. "And yet you waited too long," Wednesday stated calmly. "So I said it first." Luke clicked his tongue but couldn't help chuckling under his breath. Of course, he couldn't always win against her. "So is there something you want to say to me?" Wednesday asked, her gaze fixed on him. Luke looked at her too, lifted a hand, and brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers. "What I want to say is that I love you, Wednesday," he said. She didn't visibly react, but he could tell her breath caught for a second. Then, without a word, Wednesday leaned in and kissed him again, this time more slowly. When they pulled apart, Wednesday kept her face close to his, her dark eyes locked onto his. "I thought you were dead," she admitted, her tone unshaken. Oh, the telepathic link, Luke thought, realizing immediately. That must have been why Wednesday feared the worst. "I did die. My heart stopped beating for a few moments. Luckily, my green aura awakened, though I guess you already know that, right?" Luke said as if it weren't a big deal. "Yes, I know," Wednesday nodded, her gaze scanning his face before lowering to his neck. "Your scar has completely vanished." As she said this, Wednesday lifted her hand and brushed 2 fingers across the skin where the scar used to be. Luke felt a tingle run through his body as her fingers slowly traced a path from his neck down to his chest. "You should take the fact that you died for a few seconds more seriously," Wednesday said, her voice as flat as always, but with a clear undertone of reproach. "You were in a coma for over a week," she added. "It's not like I could have done much about it. Elliot was ridiculously strong and fast above all," Luke said. Wednesday didn't reply right away. She just kept watching him closely. Luke, for his part, took a moment to examine himself. Despite everything that had happened, he felt good. No, better than good. He had awakened with a clarity he had never experienced before. His body felt light, his mind sharp, and he had 4 awakened auras. It was as if everything had clicked into place. Luke smiled slightly, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. "Actually, right now I feel amazing," Luke said, jumping out of bed and stretching his body, which seemed ready to enter another life-or-death battle. "I don't know how to explain it," he added, rolling his shoulders and clenching his fists. "I feel invincible." Elliot is dead. Did they kill his brother? Luke asked, looking at Wednesday. Yes, he's dead. Wednesday nodded, then fell silent. She watched Luke closely, analyzing every nuance in his expression, in his stance. His confidence wasn't new to her. Luke had always been someone who faced danger with the certainty of a warrior who knew exactly what he was capable of. But this was different. There was something in the way he carried himself, in that faint smile of his, a calmness that didn't border on arrogance but something else. An absolute certainty. His confidence had always been backed by his battle record, by his 3 auras, but now with 4. This was a different level. Luke tilted his head slightly, as if remembering something. Gabriel had 2 daughters and a wife, he said in a neutral tone, with no anger in his voice, no trace of vengeance. I could go eliminate them, he added with a smile. Now they would feel what he had felt. The tables had turned. In the past, he'd been forced to live under protection in Nevermore, then with the Umbrio for a time, later with the Adams. And even then, he'd suffered assassination attempts. You might run into one of the old Spellmans who made deals with demons, Wednesday said calmly, though she was clearly observing his reaction. My father and Uncle Fester fought 2 of those demonic elders. That's why they were late arriving in Sunnyvale. That would be interesting, Luke replied with a faint smile, a hand to his chin as he wondered how powerful demonic elders over 150 years old might be. Wednesday took note of that. There had been no hesitation in his response, not a trace of concern, fear, or even a pause to consider the possibility. It was as if the concept of facing an ancient spellman, someone who had made pacts with demons, didn't represent a real threat to him. That's not all. Remember that every psychic family has 2 or more main branches. The Adams have 3. The Spellmans have 2, said Wednesday. Then there'll be more hunting, Luke said in a carefree tone. Elliot and Gabriel were the strongest among the 2 main Spellman branches, at least among the living members. That didn't include the ancient ones, those who had made demonic pacts and remained in the shadows. But Luke wasn't worried about them. Elliot and Gabriel had been active fighters, shaped by battle, not like those rusty old relics who had stayed hidden for so long. If he faced them, he would do so with the certainty that his skills surpassed any enemy who had spent too much time lurking in the dark. However, Wednesday didn't seem to share his confidence. And what about Edward? She asked, her tone as neutral as ever, but with a calculated gleam in her eyes. Luke fell silent. Edward. The name carried a different weight. He wasn't just another Spellman. He was the Spellman, the one who had started the demonic dealings and sparked the war against the Poe family when they discovered his forbidden practices. Edward was responsible for the Poe massacre. And on top of all that, he was a psychic who, in his time, had stood at the top of the power scale alongside Edgar Allan Poe, Luke's own great-great-grandfather. Add to that the fact that he was still alive after more than 200 years and wielded demonic powers. Luke exhaled slowly, some of that absolute confidence fading from his expression. That could complicate things, he admitted quietly. Wednesday watched him for a long moment before letting out a soft breath. She felt relieved that Luke hadn't been completely blinded by his power. Well, at least your new aura hasn't rotted your brain. It'd be a shame if you got stronger but dumber, she said in her usual biting tone. She got out of bed calmly and walked up to Luke. Then she crossed her arms. But you're still a reckless idiot, Wednesday declared. You nearly died, were in a coma for over a week, and here you are, walking around like it's nothing and talking about going back to fight. Not exactly a sign of intelligence. I'm fine, seriously. With my green aura and my clairvoyance, I know the state of my body, Luke said, patting his chest confidently a couple of times. I don't need to rest, he added, like a child trying to get permission from his mother to go out and play. But Wednesday didn't seem impressed. Her gaze grew even more critical before, without warning, she grabbed him firmly by the ear. What hey? Luke protested at the slight pain as she tugged on his ear. Forcing him to walk back to the bed. Though he could have easily broken free, he didn't. With a firm movement, Wednesday made him sit down and then pushed him until he was lying down again. "Rest," Wednesday ordered in her usual relentless tone. Luke frowned and looked at her with a mix of annoyance and amusement. "You know this is completely unnecessary, right?" "You know I couldn't care less, right?" Wednesday shot back, staring down at him with her stern expression. "You'll be allowed to move when my grandmother monitors your condition," she said seriously. "Until then, you're not going anywhere." "And where is she now?" Luke asked with resignation. "She's not home. She'll be back in a couple of hours," Wednesday replied calmly. Luke was about to say something in response, but before he could get a word out, Wednesday climbed on top of him, settling herself naturally. Luke's body tensed immediately, and for the first time, he noticed what Wednesday was wearing. The pajamas he had given her. A black t-shirt with tiny skulls and a matching black mini-shorts, patterned the same, leaving her legs completely exposed. Luke blinked, feeling his mind go blank for a moment. Wednesday rarely wore anything that showed so much skin, and he had given her that set with a pretty obvious intention. He just hadn't expected her to use it against him. Wednesday leaned in slightly, her expression unreadable, but a mischievous gleam danced in her eyes as she watched him closely. "On second thought, if you really want to leave, you can," said Wednesday. Luke swallowed hard and stared at her. He couldn't push her off. Technically, he could. No, you're right. I should rest," Luke said, leaning back a little more into the pillows and coughing as if he were a bit sick. "See, it's not that hard to rest, is it?" said Wednesday with a faint mocking smile on her face. Yeah, whatever," Luke muttered, and with his hand, he began caressing Wednesday's thigh, slowly sliding it up toward her mini shorts. "We can't do that right now," said Wednesday, stopping Luke's hand. "Why?" Luke said, clearly unhappy. "Don't tell me I can't do that either because of the whole resting thing." "It's not that," Wednesday replied seriously. "You were unconscious for over a week. A lot has happened and you need to know about it." "Oh, what happened?" Luke asked, expecting the usual. The outcast society in shock over Elliot and Gabriel's deaths. "There was a trial against the Spellmans. It lasted 3 days and we won," Wednesday said. Luke's eyes widened in surprise. "What?" he exclaimed, stunned. Luke still couldn't believe it. He looked at Wednesday with a furrowed brow, trying to process what he had just heard. "They presented the evidence, and we won. That fast?" he asked, confused. According to Wednesday, he had been unconscious for about 10 days, and during that time the trial had already taken place. Yes, and yes," Wednesday replied with her characteristic calm. Then, with an unusual patience, one she reserved only for Luke, she began to recount the events with precision. The trial lasted 3 days. It was a public trial, which meant that not only the accusers and the accused were present, but also an audience composed of influential figures within the outcast society. No one could ignore what was happening. Octavius, with his meticulous organization, presented all the evidence strategically, from least to most impactful. Each piece hit harder than the last, leaving the Spellmans increasingly cornered. One of the clearest pieces of evidence was the corpse of Elliot Spellman himself, presented before everyone. And before everyone's eyes, the demonic book of SAGA was revealed, which the corpse had carefully hidden in one of his pockets, luckily, one the telekinetic orb from Luke hadn't pierced. Octavius explained how Elliot had obtained that book. Although it was still a theory, everything added up, and when the accused were questioned, they couldn't refute it or prove their innocence. The late Dolores Spellman had been present the night when Wednesday and Luke killed Crackstone. Why was she there? How did she know Luke would be there? No one knew. Luke and Wednesday had done everything in secret, flying out of the Adams mansion at night. In addition, the Adams family presented evidence showing that Crackstone had gained his powers through the Book of SAGA. It came to light for the first time publicly, although the influential figures already knew it. After all, it was highly suspicious for a normie to reach such heights of power with just a witchcraft book. They also presented the strange events surrounding Luke, lesser demons attacking him, too much of a coincidence. During the Blood Moon, when an army of undead attacked Nevermore, Atlas, a direct servant of Elliot, aimed to resurrect Crackstone, but failed. That much was already known, as Luke had previously presented evidence and struck a heavy blow. However, they had once believed the Spellmans wanted to bring Crackstone back to kill Luke, so the blame for the attack on Nevermore wouldn't fall on them. But now, it was clear that their true goal was the demonic book. They knew it was hidden inside Crackstone's sarcophagus. Yet the most incriminating evidence came with a testimony no one expected. A memory fragment from the late Sophie Poe, Luke's mother. A memory fragment is proof that cannot be faked, a 100% true recollection. If the machine used to play it rejects it, it's false. But this fragment was not rejected and was played before everyone's eyes. Sophie, fleeing from the Spellmans with John, at one point had no choice but to confront them. They faced Elliot Spellman, much younger, and his father. It was a brutal battle, but then the definitive proof appeared. In the memory, Mortimer Spellman could be clearly seen using regeneration he should not have had, and telekinesis, another aura he should not have possessed. And in his hands was another of the 6 demonic books. The Book of Necrathes, a tome wrapped in obsidian chains, covered in profane inscriptions that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Very different in appearance from the Book of SAGA. At that moment, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Not only had they possessed the Book of SAGA, though they hadn't used it, but they also possessed the Book of Necrathes and had used it, proving they had already made deals with demons. The memory ended with Sophie and John managing to escape, creating a distraction at the cost of their own safety. Not even Octavius had expected such clear evidence. Sophie Poe had accomplished something extraordinary. Extracting one's own memory was a complex process, requiring a stable mental state and great magical skill. But to do it while being hunted, injured, and exhausted, it was practically impossible, and yet she had done it. The impact was immediate. The Spellmans present in the courtroom hadn't seen it coming. For years, they had woven webs of lies, manipulations, and political power to protect themselves. They believed they could face any accusation with excuses, legal tricks, and their influence over judges and other powerful outcast bloodlines. But Sophie Poe had destroyed them from beyond the grave. After that, the tribunal didn't take long to deliver its verdict. The Spellmans were declared guilty of treason against the outcast society. Their bloodline was marked as an enemy of humanity. Their influence, their wealth, their alliances, everything crumbled in the span of 3 days. But the final blow came at that very moment. The Spellman family members who had attended the trial, confident they would walk free as always, were paralyzed. They never expected such incriminating evidence from Sophie Poe. The judges ordered their immediate arrest. There was no time to react. Guardians, high-ranking outcasts, and enforcers of outcast law pounced on them. Some tried to resist, but were easily subdued. Even Gomez stepped forward. Without Elliot or Gabriel, no living member of the Spellman family could stand against Gomez. They were sentenced to execution. "So, it's over," Luke murmured, looking up at the ceiling. "No, remember, they have 2 main branches. Elliot's branch is almost wiped out. Only 2 people remain alive, Gabriel's 2 daughters. His wife died in a battle that happened 2 days ago," Wednesday said, making Luke turn back to her. Wednesday went on to explain that members of both branches had been imprisoned after the verdict. Among them were Gabriel's wife and his 2 daughters, as well as the mother of Elliot and Gabriel, a very powerful psychic elder, over 70 years old. The date of their execution was set, but the story didn't end there. 2 days ago, the prison where all the Spellmans present at the trial were being held was attacked by extremely powerful hooded figures, the demonic elders. Lesser demons also appeared, the same kind Luke had slain at Petropolis Manor, throwing the place into chaos. The battle was short, but devastating. Several members of the Spellman family died in the attack, one of them being Gabriel's wife, who protected her daughters so they could escape. Afterwards, some members of the other main branch also perished. but the rest escaped with the help of the demonic elders. This attack only proved, with even more certainty, that the Spellmans make deals with demons. They can control lesser demons, Luke murmured, and Wednesday nodded. Now the real war begins. The true enemies are Edward and the other old people, Wednesday said seriously. As for Elliot's branch, Wednesday continued, her tone calculating, only 3 people remain alive, his mother and Gabriel's 2 daughters. That puts us in a strong position. Of the 2 branches, Elliot's was the most powerful, but you took care of the most dangerous ones. Elliot, Sebastian, Sabrina, Atlas, all dead, said Wednesday, raising a finger for each name as she listed them. Then we also killed Dolors with my uncle's help, and I killed Gabriel with the help of the others, she added. Elliot's father died at the hands of my father. Luke added another name to the list. Yes, only 3 remain from Elliot's branch, and from the other branch, only those who managed to escape. After them come the demonic elders, Luke said. Wednesday nodded slowly, brow furrowed, as she analyzed the information. Based on what we know, the old men are, at the very least, Elliot's grandparents, but there are more. How many more? Asked Luke. Wednesday narrowed her eyes, organizing her thoughts aloud. Elliot was born in the 1980s. His parents must have been born in the 1950s or earlier, which means his grandparents could have been born around 1900 or a little later. We know Edward started it all, and before him, the Spellmans were respectable members of society. So everything began around 1830, when Edward was about 30 years old. In 1840, he killed Edgar. The speed at which Wednesday spoke was astonishing, and the way she laid out all the facts impressed Luke. The important thing is that before Edward, the Spellmans were a respectable family, which means that any demonic old manny's his descendant, not someone prior to him, Wednesday continued, then paused briefly. Fortunately, the Poes, even though they lost the war when it began, managed to kill some of them, like John killing Elliot's father. So considering that there were 4 elders at the prison attack, there might be double that number, and I believe there are at most 10, including Edward, Wednesday concluded. Plus the 3 from Elliot's main branch, that's 13. How many survived from the other main branch? Luke asked. 11, and they have loyal servants who won't hesitate to obey their orders. Not to mention that, somehow, they've managed to control lesser demons, Wednesday replied. Luke let out a sigh, but instead of worry, a slight smile appeared on his face. Even so, they're clearly outnumbered. They're up against the entire outcast society. 4 psychic families still stand. The Spellmans no longer count, and from the Poes only I remain, but the other 4 families are intact, he added. Wednesday tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his point. Then there are the 7 most powerful vampire clans, and the 7 pureblood werewolf families, who follow the Lord of the Wolves, the strongest of their kind, Luke said, placing a hand on his chin, wondering how strong this wolf lord really was. Probably on par with Elliot or slightly below, since Elliot, as a psychic, looked down on all the other outcast races. And then there are the other races. Sirens, faceless ones, gorgons. They may not be as strong as psychics, vampires, or werewolves, but they're still a force that can't be ignored. The numerical advantage is overwhelming, Luke concluded, leaning back against the pillow with a faint smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could relax. He could even leave all the work to others while he lazed around. It wasn't a critical situation like the Wizarding War in Harry Potter, where the Death Eaters had a clear numerical advantage and the good side only won by a miracle. If it hadn't been for Lily Potter's ancient magic, Voldemort would have annihilated everyone. However, his moment of satisfaction was cut short when Wednesday spoke. "Don't be so sure," she said. "The Spellmans aren't making deals with demons on a whim. Their goal has always been the extermination of normies, and they're not the only ones who think that way." Luke stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Since Edward began all of this in 1840, he's had nearly 2 centuries to forge alliances. It's possible that many of the most powerful outcast families, vampires, werewolves, even some of the others' races, have agreed to work with the Spellmans, Wednesday said. Even knowing they're dealing with demons, I thought everyone saw those beings as enemies of the world, said Luke. It's true, Wednesday answered. But if the Spellmans offered them power, longer lifespans, and the promise of a world ruled by outcasts, it wouldn't be hard for many to accept the deal. Luke remained silent for a moment, then remembered something. His mother, in the memory fragment he had consumed, had warned him, "Don't trust all the outcast families." Still, Luke doubted that all the powerful clans and families had betrayed their morals out of ambition. Making deals with demons was still a major taboo. It didn't matter how much time had passed or how many Spellmans had tried to normalize it. Some may have joined them, but I doubt they're the majority, Luke said, crossing his arms. I'd say it's more like 70-30. 70% of outcasts who'll stay on the good side and 30% who sold out and joined the Spellmans. Makes sense. Even with all their influence, convincing the entire outcast society to join them is impossible. Most likely, we still have an overwhelming numerical advantage, Wednesday nodded. Luke smirked. Then in the end, they're still screwed. Don't get too confident. 30% traitors is still a significant number, and that number isn't confirmed. No one would help the Spellmans openly at the trial, but they might still be supporting them in secret. That's the problem, we have spies, and we don't know who they are, Wednesday said. Luke nodded. Not everything would be so easy, but it would still be far easier than everything he'd already been through. Except in battle. If he had to face Edward now, he knew he'd be screwed. I need to train my new aura, Luke thought. Damn, I missed so many big events. I would have loved to see the Spellmans' faces when they saw Elliot's corpse in the state I left him, Luke complained out loud. Had he been in a public place, surrounded by Spellmans who couldn't attack him, it would have been sublime to see the expressions of defeat and rage on their faces. No one thinks you killed Elliot on your own, Wednesday said, and went on to explain how they decided to handle things. Luke agreed. Better for him if the next Spellman he ran into underestimated him and didn't know he had a fourth aura up his sleeve. That was a long talk, Luke said after glancing at the time on an old dark wooden clock hanging on the wall of Wednesday's room. We're not done yet, Wednesday replied, staring at him intently. Luke raised an amused eyebrow and slowly slid his hands down to Wednesday's thighs, then to her backside. Oh, so now you're ready, he said with a mischievous smile. No, not yet. We need to talk about the Battle of Sunnyvale, said Wednesday, rolling her eyes and moving Luke's hand away from her backside. Luke let out a dramatic sigh, dropping his head back onto the pillow. What now? What happened in Sunnyvale besides killing Elliot and Gabriel? He asked with a slight grimace. Enid, Wednesday replied curtly. Enid. Luke was surprised by Wednesday's response. He had almost forgotten that Enid had shown up in Sunnyvale. She even helped him face Niklaus, and then went on to help Wednesday confront Gabriel. She helped you kill Gabriel? Luke asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, with me she gave him the final blow after thinking you were dead, Wednesday replied. Natasha, Luke remembered. Wednesday had told him that Natasha acted heartbroken, as if he had died, and she managed to convince Wednesday of it. It seemed to be the same with Enid. She got furious when she found out you died and came here especially to help you. Does that give you any idea? Wednesday asked, staring intently at Luke. She still has feelings for me, Luke answered with a calm expression. It was easy to tell. He was surprised, though. Last time he spoke to Enid, she slapped him and called him a bastard. How did she end up having feelings for him again? After a breakup like that, it would have made more sense for her to hate him with everything she had. Wednesday didn't say anything for a few seconds. She just observed him. Then, in her usual tone, she asked, "And what do you think about that?" Luke remained silent, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he remembered those few seconds when he was dead. In that total darkness, memories of Enid had come to him. When I was dead for those seconds, I realized Enid was important. My first crush, and the person I felt closest to, Luke said, his expression clearly struggling to get the words out. It's sad that someone can become the most important person in my life after just a few months of dating, Luke added with a grimace. He really was antisocial. At the time, Edgar and Natasha were just acquaintances. He didn't fully trust them. And in his past life, he had never loved or been willing to die for anyone. In this life, he had lived 14 years without a single real connection, until he met Enid. I guess Enid didn't have much competition back then in the category of most important person in my life. But that's in the past. I don't feel love for Enid. Just a strange kind of affection. If she were about to die, I'd save her. Not out of love, but because she was important to me once, Luke concluded. Wednesday nodded. I understand. A brief silence followed. Then Wednesday, with the same calm tone, asked, What about now? Luke looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Now what? Wednesday tilted her head slightly, eyes still locked on him. Now who's the most important person? Luke stared at her for a few seconds and replied with another question. What do you think? I don't like assumptions, Wednesday said quietly. It's you, Wednesday, Luke answered without hesitation. In that darkness, the most important memories were with you. That's why I awakened my green aura, he added. Wednesday lowered her gaze slightly, as if processing each word. A comfortable silence settled between them until Luke, unable to hold it in, said, All right, enough emotional talk. That's not who we are, he muttered, shaking his head a little, like he was shedding a layer of vulnerability. Then, without wasting time, he slid his hand again toward Wednesday's legs with a very clear goal in mind. His fingers moved with familiarity, until once again he was stopped midway. I still need to say something, Wednesday said, catching his hand with hers. Luke let out a dramatic sigh and raised an eyebrow with fake impatience. What? That I'm the most important person to you, he teased with a slight smile. Wednesday rolled her eyes, but the faint curve on her lips betrayed her. No, she said, as if the mere suggestion bored her. You should already know that. Luke nodded. Then what? He asked. Wednesday looked at him in silence. Her eyes searched his, as if deciding whether to say what she was about to confess or leave it buried. But she wasn't the type to hold back the truth, especially not with Luke. Enid didn't show up in Sunnyvale by coincidence, she finally said calmly. I made her come. Yeah, that's right. She mentioned something to help us in the fight, Luke asked. No, I had a vision during Ajax's birthday, Enid dying in Sunnyvale. I wanted her to die in that battle, Wednesday replied with brutal honesty. Luke didn't respond right away. He just stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard, though deep down, it didn't surprise him as much as it probably should have. Why? He asked, although he already suspected the answer. She was still obsessed with you. I realized it during Ajax's birthday, and I didn't like that she kept chasing after you. So when I saw the vision where she died, I decided to make sure she'd be there, Wednesday said, briefly looking away. Luke stayed silent, not out of shock, but because, in part, he had already sensed it. I'm guessing you saved her since she didn't die. Why? I saw how she fought. The obsession she has for you. It's similar to mine, said Wednesday as her hand gently stroked Luke's cheek with the tip of her fingers. Her gaze was fixed on him, intense, far too intense. Obsession, Luke thought, swallowing hard, a faint sweat forming on his forehead. You're flattering me, I think, Luke murmured with a half-nervous smile. You should feel flattered, Wednesday said, slowly lowering her hand but never breaking eye contact. Anyway, what matters is that you saved her, Luke said with a cough. Wednesday looked at him, surprised not to find judgment in his expression. That's it, she asked, expecting a stronger reaction, some judgment, maybe anger. At the very least, some disapproval at the idea of sending someone to their death, especially Enid. Luke shrugged. You saved her, whether it was because she shares the same obsession as you, or whatever it was. That says more about you than your original intent. I see, Wednesday said, her voice less tense, more relieved. Without another word, she moved softly, sliding closer on the bed. She settled next to Luke, curling up with her head resting on his shoulder, her hand gently placed on his chest. Luke glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, and seeing that the emotional and strange atmosphere seemed to have passed, he allowed himself a small smile. "So, can we finally get down to business now?" he asked, eyebrow raised and tone full of intent. "Later. Right now I want to rest," Wednesday said, without moving or even opening her eyes. Luke smiled faintly with resignation. It just wasn't his lucky day in that department. And so they stayed like that, in silence, resting. Within a few minutes, Wednesday fell asleep and slipped into a deep slumber. She could finally rest, relieved that Luke had woken up, and that she had told him so many things she'd been holding back. 2 days had passed since Luke regained consciousness. During those days, he was discharged by Wednesday's grandmother and was finally able to get out of bed without Wednesday scolding him. He also had a conversation the night before with Edgar. It had been a long time since he last spoke with his great-great-grandfather, who rarely emerged from the necklace anymore. That night, the ghost appeared with a faint glow, as if the energy that once surrounded him had been drained by time. Even so, when he saw Luke, a wide and proud smile spread across his spectral face. Edgar was very happy with the news. Luke had never seen him so ecstatic. It was understandable, after such a long time, they were finally very close to victory. It had finally been revealed to the outcast society that the Spellmans were making pacts with demons. "I never imagined that the skinny, stubborn kid who could barely walk a few miles to Nevermore would accomplish all this," Edgar said, laughing. "Let alone kill Elliot, the Spellman patriarch, and even less, awaken a fourth aura." Luke smiled, though he couldn't help but notice something strange. Edgar, always chatty, mocking, and sarcastic, was now speaking more slowly. His floating figure, once vibrant and luminous, looked blurry around the edges as if he were slowly fatting away. "Are you okay? Last time I saw you, you looked brighter," Luke said, frowning. Edgar paused, then sighed. "Not entirely. As you know, I've been searching for the Poe soul weapon for a long time, but that bastard weapon hid itself well. It's not just an object, it's semi-conscious. As you might have guessed, my soul was never inside the weapon, even though it should have been. I chose to remain in the physical world as a ghost, to guide the Poe descendants in the fight," Edgar said in a serious tone. "Are you saying?" Luke asked, leaving the sentence unfinished. Edgar nodded, slowly. "I'm connecting to it slowly and willingly. I'm doing it so I can find its whereabouts, because it's time for you to have it, especially now, at this crucial moment," said Edgar. "But if you connect to it," said Luke, without finishing the sentence, "I'll be gone. Once my soul finally enters the weapon, I'll cease to exist as a ghost, and I won't be able to speak to you anymore," Edgar said bluntly. "You don't have to do this," said Luke, crossing his arms. "I have 4 auras. The numbers are in our favor. The Spellmans are going to fall with or without that weapon." Edgar looked at him in silence for a few seconds. Then he smiled faintly. "You know that's your way of saying you care about me, right?" Edgar said with a hint of joking. He continued before Luke could protest. "And yes, you're right. The Spellmans are in a bad position. They're backed into a corner. You have 4 auras and you're stronger than ever, but the soul weapon isn't just an advantage. It's a multiplier. Your power will increase several times with it. Your ability to condense waves into the weapon will be terrifying, and much easier, much faster. On top of that, now is the best time to find it, with the war already underway. Sooner or later I'll have to do this anyway. I can't remain a ghost for eternity," Edgar concluded. Luke lowered his gaze without arguing. He knew Edgar was right. "And don't worry," added Edgar, guessing what he was thinking. "It's not like I'm going to vanish right now or tomorrow. The process is slow, very slow. I have to merge with the soul of the weapon bit by bit. If I did it all at once, I'd vanish. And I wouldn't be able to tell you where it is. But if I do it patiently, layer by layer, I can sense its location, guide you to it, before I disappear completely." "How long do you have before you find it?" Luke asked in a low voice. "I'm not sure. A few months at best," Edgar replied. Luckily, the process had already begun some time ago, which was why his spectral form was weaker now. I see, said Luke, wearing a displeased expression. He didn't want to lose Edgar. He had been the family who introduced him to the world of outcasts, taught him, and even gave him advice on things like love. The idea of never seeing him again left a bitter taste, even if, in recent months, Edgar had rarely come out. Don't worry about me, kid. I should have been dead a long time ago, and I'm ready for death and to meet the people from my time, said Edgar, stepping closer and placing a ghostly hand on his shoulder. Luke nodded slightly. After a few more words, Edgar returned to his necklace. Feeling a bit melancholic and sad, Luke went to seek comfort from the only person who could truly provide it, Wednesday. He walked through the dimly lit and gloomy Adams mansion. He climbed the stairs and opened the second door without knocking. There she was, standing with her back to him, next to the bed, folding clothes with surgical precision. Each garment fit perfectly into her black suitcase, like pieces of a puzzle. Her expression was the same as always, unshaken and serene. Luke stopped at the sight and couldn't help but frown. Wednesday was packing to return to Nevermore. Despite the chaos spreading among the outcasts, disappearances, rumors, skirmishes, covert attacks by the Spellmans, the world hadn't come to a halt. It was still mid-November, and Morticia had been firm. Wednesday couldn't keep missing school. Luke walked over and sat at the edge of the bed, watching her. Do you really have to go? We're in the middle of a war. What's the point of taking outcast history right now? He asked, crossing his arms. It's a silent war, Wednesday replied without flinching, firmly zipping up her suitcase. There are no large-scale or official battles yet. On the surface, everything seems normal, and for that very reason, classes go on. I know, we need to find the spies and all that, but I'm not going back to Nevermore. You could stay here too, Luke said, waving his hand dismissively. Wednesday turned to him calmly, though her dark eyes gleamed with a different kind of intensity. You're a special case, Luke. You awakened your fourth aura. That's not common in any psychic family. You need to train. You're our strongest card against Edward and the most powerful demonic elders, she said seriously. Luke raised an eyebrow and looked at her with mock offense. You make it sound like I'm a weapon meant to kill. So thoughtful of you, he said, feigning hurt. Wednesday couldn't help but roll her eyes. You are a weapon, and now you need to sharpen your new aura to be deadlier than ever, Wednesday said, placing her pale, cold hand on Luke's cheek. Wow, how sweet. One of the best compliments a girlfriend could give, Luke said with a slight smile. It is, and I want you to be sharpened so no one can kill you. Remember, there's a prophecy that made the Spellmans come after you. Edward and the other demonic elders still want to kill you as soon as possible, Wednesday said. All right, I'll let myself be sharpened if you're that worried, said Luke at last, raising his hands in surrender. Good decision. Your grandfather's coming tomorrow, right? Asked Wednesday. Yeah, Stanley Umbrio. Who would have thought I'd see him again? Said Luke with a slight grimace. The Umbrio family had turned their backs on Sophie, even though she was from the main branch and had stood up to demonic psychics. Now the Umbrio, especially Stanley, Sophie's father, wanted to help in the war and would use all of the family's power, mostly out of guilt. Gomez, with his classic blend of wisdom and madness, had suggested to Luke that he reveal his green aura to Stanley, since the Umbrio have a long tradition of green aura users, and Stanley himself possesses a green aura and is one of the most powerful psychics with it. Luke had agreed. That's why, the next day, Stanley would arrive to stay temporarily at the Adams mansion to train him personally. Stanley wouldn't be the only trainer. Fester and Gomez would also be his trainers, each in their own way, which was both reassuring and alarming at the same time. On one hand, Luke felt excited. Having 3 such strong and experienced figures focused on his growth was a unique opportunity. His strength would grow by leaps and bounds. On the other hand, he was fully aware of who he was dealing with. Gomez was brilliant, but unpredictable. Fester lived in another reality entirely. And Stanley, though he had always seemed like the typical kind and quiet grandfather, Luke didn't trust appearances. He knew there was something strange beneath that calm facade. He was probably some kind of control freak, a meticulous and severe maniac. The kind of old man who breaks a chair over your back if you don't learn a technique fast enough. Wednesday glanced at him, catching his expression. "Aren't you thrilled to see your grandpa?" she asked sarcastically, crossing her arms. "Looks like your heart's melting." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I'm bursting with excitement. I can't wait to see his true personality," said Luke. Wednesday let out a brief, barely audible exhale, maybe an internal laugh, but as soon as she looked at him more closely, she noticed something had changed. The teasing expression on Luke's face had faded. His gaze had dimmed a little. And then she understood. She knew Luke had just spoken with Edgar. "How was the talk with Edgar after all this time?" Wednesday asked bluntly. Luke shrugged, not feeling like saying much. In a quiet voice, he told her the essentials, that Edgar was going to slowly connect with the soul weapon, that he would guide him to it, and that after that, he would disappear forever. Wednesday listened without interrupting. She just looked at him, observed his expression, his tone, his body that seemed more tense than usual. She knew him. She knew Luke didn't cry. Without saying a word, Wednesday slowly climbed onto Luke, and before he could say anything, she gently pushed him back and kissed him. Luke, his heart beating a little faster, let himself get carried away, though he couldn't help but ask between kisses, "Wednesday, what are you doing?" Wednesday looked at him, her face just inches from his, her lips barely curving into a smile. "Let's just say I have my own way of cheering you up," Wednesday whispered. "Definitely better than an emotional talk," said Luke with a slight smile. "Of course," Wednesday replied and kissed him again while starting to unbutton his shirt. Luke had been right to come to Wednesday's room looking for comfort. Though not exactly in the way he had imagined. It was nighttime. The Adams mansion was completely silent, with only the occasional strange noise echoing through the halls, as if the house itself were haunted. In one of the many rooms, Luke was sleeping soundly. His breathing was slow, steady, his body relaxed. The room was dim, the curtains closed and not a single candle lit. Everything seemed calm. Until, suddenly, his eyes snapped open. "Tish," Luke clicked his tongue, and in that exact instant, his figure vanished from the bed in a flash. Boom! A bolt of lightning struck the mattress, disintegrating it completely in an explosion of electric sparks and twisted springs. Luke reappeared on the other side of the room, crouched and ready to counterattack, his gaze lit with irritation. "Again, Fester, that's bed number 32 you've destroyed this month," Luke complained. But he didn't have time to keep complaining. The door burst open. A blue flash lit up everything. "You must always be on alert, boy," shouted Fester as he hurled himself forward like a human projectile wrapped in electricity, eyes bulging with manic excitement. Luke reacted instantly, tilting his head just in time to dodge the electric punch that grazed past his face, illuminating the darkness with crackling blue sparks. Residual energy crackled in the air, but didn't reach him. It wasn't like in the past. When he had faced Elliot Spellman, another electricity user, Luke hadn't been able to dodge his close-range attacks. Elliot's fists crackled with such intensity that even if Luke avoided the direct impact, the current would envelop the area around his body and reach his skin. Back then, his telekinetic defenses weren't strong enough to block the electric field. Now it was different. With the training he had received, Luke had developed a more solid and reactive telekinetic shield, capable of activating within fractions of a second and holding up long enough for him to retreat or counterattack without taking immediate damage. Plus, with his newly trained aura, his regeneration had improved significantly. He could afford to take a few hits, knowing his body could heal itself. With a quick step, he channeled his energy and pushed Fester back with a burst of invisible force, gaining some space. "At least warn me before blasting my face with electricity," said Luke, spinning on his heel, ready to flee. He was tired, and he knew that damn bald man wasn't alone. Fester just laughed like it was a compliment. If you can predict it, it's useless as training. Your clairvoyant aura is getting more and more annoying. The training with Gomez, Fester, and Stanley had completely changed Luke's perception. Now his clairvoyance was passive, like a sixth sense that buzzed even in his dreams. A slight hum in his mind, a pressure at the back of his neck, a tingling sensation on his skin that woke him up a split second before danger struck. And he needed it. Because his trainers were demented monsters. Fester attacked him at random hours, with electricity, homemade traps, and screams loud enough to wake the dead. Gomez forced him into near-death duels at any time of day. And Stanley was exactly what Luke had imagined. Behind that kind, grandfatherly facade was a military-obsessed control freak. He taught Luke how to enhance his green aura and master techniques typical of its users. But if Luke made even the slightest mistake, Stanley corrected it with a cane to the ribs. And then there was what Stanley called real experience. According to him, true growth only came through adversity, by pushing both mind and body to the limit. That's why he not only approved of Fester's surprise attacks, he joined them. Even Gomez, just for fun, and to help Luke learn to overcome the unpredictable, would join in on what he called tests. Peaceful sleep had become a luxury Luke no longer knew, not in the 3 months since Wednesday had left for Nevermore. Thankfully, tonight he had one thing going in his favor. Gomez wasn't home. His role as head of the Demon Extermination Department kept him away most of the time, especially now that the Society of Outcasts was waging a silent war against the Spellmans. A covert war of betrayals, selective assassinations, and political maneuvers beneath the surface. Luke shot out of the room at full speed, lifting off the ground without even bothering to touch it. He flew through the air, using his telekinesis as propulsion, gliding down the hallways with increasing precision. He knew he couldn't beat Fester in raw speed. His telekinesis still wasn't powerful enough to match the electric acceleration of the bald man, who moved like lightning through the narrow hallways of the mansion. He could use shambles, his teleportation technique, to instantly gain distance. But there were rules. Ever since training began, it had been established that he could only use shambles to teleport up to a maximum of 15 meters inside the mansion. Otherwise, it would be too easy to escape. And that was the whole point, not to escape. To adapt, to endure, to overcome. As he flew at full speed through the East Wing, Luke's goal was clear: reach the lobby safely. A room where none of his trainers were allowed to attack him. He could stay there for 30 minutes at most, a time during which he could rest, heal, or even sleep, though it was barely enough and far from comfortable since there was no bed. But getting there was the real challenge. An electric discharge hissed behind him, striking an old painting that exploded into splinters. "Faster, boy," Fester shouted from behind, wrapped in lightning. Luke spun midair, activated shambles, and vanished just before being hit, reappearing at the opposite end of the hallway. Son of a bitch if you were alone, Luke thought, clenching his jaw. With his current abilities, he was confident he could face Fester in a one-on-one. He wasn't the same as before. He had killed Elliot Spellman, patriarch of the Spellman family, one of the strongest psychics in the outcast society. Elliot was from the same generation as Fester, just a few years younger. And yes, some factors had worked in his favor that time. In fact, Elliot had killed him for a few seconds. And he only survived thanks to awakening his green aura, and the fact that Natasha had been fighting Elliot at the same time. Since then, 3 months of intensive training had passed. 3 months of physical, mental, and energy refinement. And now, facing someone like Fester didn't intimidate him. The problem was that this wasn't a fair fight. Stanley was nearby, lurking like a predator, waiting for Luke to lose his temper and go all in out of frustration so he could land his strike. Luke wasn't afraid to face Stanley or Gomez one-on-one either. The issue was when two of them, Or worse, all three teamed up. Adding just one to the equation turned it into a losing battle from the very first second. And beyond their individual strength, there was something else to consider. They were cheaters. No rules, no honor. They'd use dirty tricks, ambushes, whatever gave them the upper hand. And all of this, while Luke trained like a madman during the day. Almost there, Luke thought. He kept flying toward the lobby, but something felt off. His danger sense buzzed, a warning that made him activate his future vision. He caught a glimpse of the next few seconds. Stanley bursting through a wall like a missile, shattering it to pieces, launching the sole of his foot straight at Luke's face with devastating force. The old man's body had been pushed to its absolute limit by the green aura. He possessed strength, speed, agility, endurance, and regeneration. Luke estimated that the bastard had strength exceeding 50 tons easily. If he relied only on his telekinesis to dodge or block, it would be useless. He had to use clairvoyance, predict his attacks, and react with inhuman speed. Just as he expected, the wall shattered like paper, and a kick came straight at his face, but he was already ready. As seen in his vision, the wall gave way a second later, like tissue. Stanley shot forward, spinning in midair, and delivered a crushing downward kick. But Luke was prepared. At the exact moment, he unleashed a controlled telekinetic burst beneath his body, an unnatural, serpentine motion that propelled him backward just in time. Stanley's foot slammed into empty ground. The floor cracked, then exploded into a crater a meter wide, shards flying in every direction. Stanley straightened with calm precision, perfectly balanced. "Good reflexes," he said in a neutral tone. "You used your future sight well, but if you think you're going to make it to the safe zone, you'll have to do more than just see what's coming." "I know," said Luke, smiling slightly. And in that instant, his body seemed to vanish. A cloud of white smoke enveloped him, and his silhouette scattered as if it were mist. A visual illusion. Stanley, unsurprised, narrowed his eyes. The entire hallway filled with thick white smoke, completely obscuring visibility in all directions. However, the old man simply shook his head. "Useless, I don't need to see. Your scent is enough," the old man murmured calmly. He took a firm step forward, guided by his sense of smell, honed by decades of training. But just as he was about to lunge in Luke's direction, something changed. From the far end of the hallway, a blue electric flash lit up the fog. "I've got you, bastard," Fester shouted, bursting onto the scene with a manic laugh, his eyes wide as his body crackled with energy. Before Stanley could warn him, Fester was already lunging toward him with a concentrated electrical punch. "Tusk," Stanley frowned. He turned just in time to see Fester's face lit with excitement, convinced he was looking at Luke. Another one of Luke's illusions. He had altered Fester's perception to make him believe Stanley was him. The old man raised his wrapped fist and met the electric punch head-on, creating a brutal explosion in the middle of the hallway. The smoke partially cleared from the shockwave as both fists clashed. "Fester, I'm not Luke," snapped Stanley, pushing back hard. "What? But you have his face and his scent," said Fester, confused, still pushing. "It's an illusion," said Stanley. "You should be able to tell, but your mental stability is questionable," he muttered to himself. Fester looked around, disoriented, as the rest of the smoke began to fade. He clicked his tongue and muttered, "Too many auras are such a pain." Stanley looked down the hallway. There was no trace of Luke. It was already useless to chase him. He'd had enough time to reach the lobby. "He's getting better," said Fester, laughing and rubbing his hands, a little disappointed by how little of a fight he got. "Yes, too much for his age," said Stanley, unable to hide his surprise. He had trained his beloved granddaughter, Veronica, the next heir of the Umbrio, the pride of the family. He had taught her with discipline, yes, but also with care. Veronica had been treated as what she was, the princess of her lineage. Her training had been demanding, but never as extreme as Luke's. It would be dangerous for any teenager's psyche, even for an outcast. Luke, on the other hand, was being pushed to the limit, and the most unsettling part was that he endured it. Not just endured it under this level of constant pressure, calculated aggression, and relentless attacks day and night. Most teenagers, even among outcasts, would have broken under that kind of burden. They would have lost their minds or collapsed, but not Luke. Every day, with every extreme training session, every ambush in the middle of the night, it sharpened him further. And Stanley saw it in his eyes. It wasn't just training. Behind his defensive moves, the escape strategies, the shields and feints, the quick counterattacks, there was something more. A hidden intent. Luke was waiting. He wasn't just surviving the training, he was waiting, holding back for the right moment. When he could catch them separately, one by one, to pay them back. And if he did it with 4 auras, along with his adaptability and the fact that he had killed Elliot at 16, be dangerous. "We'll have to keep an eye on him," said Stanley, looking at Fester. "Yeah, it's gonna be fun when he starts paying us back for real," said Fester, an innocent gleam in his eyes, eagerly awaiting that moment. Luke finally entered the lobby. The place was dimly lit. A few weak candles barely illuminated the space. Only 30 minutes, Luke thought bitterly. He walked toward the center, preparing to sit, but noticed a movement behind him. A figure flipped down from the upper part of the lobby, landing cleanly in his position. Luke twisted his torso and stepped aside. His attacker's foot slammed against the ground. He took a few steps back and raised an eyebrow, already knowing who it was. "You too. The lobby is supposed to be a safe zone." "Your trainers can't attack you," said Natasha, advancing with light steps. "I'm not part of the official program." Natasha's red hair fell almost over her shoulders, her gaze fixed on Luke. She wore tight combat clothes, ready to fight. "Let me rest, damn it," Luke thought, dodging another strike from Natasha by barely tilting his head. Natasha continued her assault. Her fists sliced through the air with precision. Her technique was flawless, her body agile and strong. But it wasn't enough. Not now, not against Luke's current level. When they first officially met and lived in Jericho before classes started, Natasha could take him down with a finger. Even when Luke used his telekinesis back then, he was no match for Natasha, who trained him in martial arts, and he never managed to defeat her. But now he was different. He had been through many battles and countless training sessions. He had 4 auras. Luke's current level was enough to surpass her effortlessly. He dodged 3 more attacks without stepping back. His body moved fluidly, as if he already knew what she was going to do. And in fact, he did. "Are you going to keep going, or do you want to see if I've already surpassed you?" Luke asked, sidestepping a kick. "I don't need to see anything," Natasha replied without stopping. "I already know, but I like seeing your current level." Luke spun and, with a quick feint, caught her wrist in one hand. Natasha tried to use the momentum to twist out of it, but he was already a step ahead. He brought her down gently, without force, guiding her to the ground in a single smooth motion. Their breaths mingled for a second. Natasha tried to use her free hand to strike him, but Luke stopped her, catching it as well. "Hey, that would have hurt," Luke murmured, close enough for Natasha to hear him. "Why are you complaining? You would have dodged or blocked it anyway," said Natasha with a slight smile. She tried to move, but couldn't. Luke's hands held her wrists firmly against the floor. "All right, you can't move now. Do you give up? I want to sleep," Luke said in a tired tone. Natasha stayed silent, her eyes locked on Luke's, who was also looking straight at her. She remembered clearly the times when he couldn't beat her, not even in a sparring match. When he would end up on the floor, panting, while she corrected his stance with strict precision. And now he was there, holding her down with both hands. No telekinesis, no blue aura, just strength and control. There was no surprise or irritation in Natasha, only pride. "All right, I'll leave you alone," Natasha finally said. "Great, thanks," said Luke, loosening his grip. He got up slowly and walked toward the only resting place in the lobby, an old two-seater couch with no cushions, a stiff frame, and a low backrest. Uncomfortable, but better than the floor. He let himself drop with a sigh, closing his eyes as soon as he settled in. Natasha watched him from the floor, now sitting. Her hair slightly messy, her breathing still a bit unsteady. She looked at him with her head resting on one hand, eyes half closed, as if studying him like before when she corrected his posture, but now with a different expression. Softer. "Are you going to sleep like that?" Natasha asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, it's better than nothing," Luke replied without opening his eyes. Natasha caught the tone in his voice. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the weight he carried, and she knew exactly what he was going through. The training Fester, Gomez, and Stanley put him through was brutal. But beyond that, she also knew something else. If Luke had wanted to, he would have already set boundaries. He could have told them directly. And even though the three trainers were eccentric, sometimes outright irrational, if Luke stood his ground, they would listen. They wouldn't keep attacking him at night. They'd give him rest. But Luke didn't do that. He accepted it because he demanded it of himself. Natasha stood up without a word and walked over to the couch. Luke still had his eyes closed. She sat down next to him in silence, then lightly patted her legs twice. "Come here." "What?" Luke asked, cracking one eye open, glancing sideways at her. "Lie down. You'll sleep more comfortably than sitting upright on this cushionless couch," Natasha replied without changing her tone. Luke looked at her for another moment. In the past, receiving a gesture like that from Natasha would have seemed impossible. She had protected him since he was a baby, looked after him, but never showed affection or care, whether maternal, sisterly, or anything else. Even when she discovered his true identity a few years ago, when he first arrived in Jericho, their relationship didn't change much. They lived together for a few months, sure, but then Luke was sent to the boarding school, Nevermore, and they were separated again. Their relationship only started to improve after Natasha was seriously injured, while being hunted by assassins sent by the Spellmans. That was when Luke showed real concern for her, and their bond began to grow. Since then, there had been more closeness between them. Small gestures, longer conversations. But never anything openly affectionate. Until Elliot. In that fight, Luke died literally and came back a few seconds later. Natasha cried for him, and fought Elliot with fury in a battle she couldn't win but didn't care. After Luke came back to life and killed Elliot, Natasha hugged him tightly and let herself be emotionally vulnerable. Since returning to the Adams mansion and the beginning of his grueling training, she hadn't left his side. She wasn't just present, she was open, close, affectionate, almost warm. Strange and unsettling for Luke, who had already built a fixed image of Natasha, a strict, emotionless, sarcastic, and extremely disciplined housemaster. And now there she was, sitting beside him, offering her lap as a pillow. Luke hesitated for a moment longer. Natasha noticed. And although she didn't say anything, she briefly thought it would be embarrassing to be rejected. Without a word, Luke finally settled in. He rested his head on her legs. He immediately noticed how comfortable they were, like a pillow, or better. He could actually get some real rest. Natasha looked down at him, unmoving at first. She simply observed his relaxed face, his calm breathing. It was hard to believe that the young man resting in her lap was the same scrawny kid she had quietly cared for all those years. The one who got expelled from multiple schools for his rebellious behavior. Natasha slowly raised her hand, as if every inch upward demanded more courage than facing an enemy. She paused for a second, then cautiously brought her hand to Luke's hair and finally touched him. With open fingers, she ran her hand through his hair in gentle, steady motions, as if she feared waking him or being pushed away. Luke felt her caress, but said nothing. It felt good, and if it helped him sleep better, he wasn't going to complain. "Wake me up in 25 minutes, he murmured, eyes still closed. Natasha raised an eyebrow slightly, continuing to stroke his hair. "No," she replied, her tone firm and strict. "What?" "You're going to sleep as long as you need to. You can allow yourself a break every now and then," she said flatly. "If anyone tries to attack you, I'll stop them." Luke fell silent. He realized she wasn't joking. Her voice wasn't sweet or soft. And thinking about it, he did deserve a proper rest after 3 grueling months of training. He could afford to sleep for a few hours. "Fine," Luke murmured at last. Within minutes, his breathing deepened. His body relaxed completely, and he fell asleep. Natasha didn't move. She kept gently stroking his hair in silence. The lobby time ran out, exactly 30 minutes. The double doors at the far end creaked open. Fester entered first, full of his usual chaotic energy, fingers sparking with electricity and a crooked smile on his face. Behind him came Stanley, hands clasped behind his back and walking with purpose, as if already planning the next phase of training. But the moment they stepped through the threshold, they stopped. Natasha slowly turned her head and gave them a single look. Fester froze instantly. The smile vanished from his face. Stanley, who rarely reacted to expressions or words, also stopped. He said nothing. Neither of them needed an explanation. That cold stare was enough. Without exchanging a word, both of them slowly backed out. The door closed behind them. After a long time, Luke finally got the long and well-deserved rest he needed. A few days later. Finally, Luke was leaving Adams Manor. After 3 months of isolation and brutal training, the open air called to him like a distant echo of freedom. But his enthusiasm was dimmed by the nature of the mission. At last, Edgar would guide him to the Poe soul weapon, which meant that once his great-great-grandfather found the weapon, he would disappear forever. His consciousness would be absorbed into the object, strengthening its essence but silencing his voice for good. Luke knew it. That day would mark their final goodbye. The mission itself didn't seem too difficult, since Edgar would guide him to the weapon like a treasure hunt. But his 3 deranged trainers, Gomez, Fester, and Stanley, would never allow something so important to be treated like a casual outing. They had a plan. Use Luke as bait. It was no secret that the Spellmans wanted Luke dead, not just because of the centuries-old grudge between their families, but also because of everything Luke had done to them. He was considered the Poe who had caused them the most damage. And then there was still the prophecy Elliot mentioned during their fight. A prophecy statting Luke was dangerous to them. They didn't know the exact details, but it was yet another reason to remove him from the board. Luke had become the #1 target of an entire ancestral bloodline of powerful psychics. The idea was simple and suicidal. While Edgar guided him to the weapon, Luke would make himself visible. The demonic elders wouldn't be able to resist hunting him. The hope was that 1, maybe 2, would show up, a perfect trap to catch monsters. Luke accepted, confident. "If a 3rd one shows up, we intervene," Gomez had said in a rare, serious tone. "Don't even think about playing the martyr. If my little viper hears you got hurt, or worse, it'll be the end of me." Luke nodded. Gomez then reached into his coat and pulled out 2 small rectangular objects. They were made of smooth, polished black stone, no larger than a matchbox. Each one had ancient runes carved into it, fine as silver veins. "Here," he said, handing them to him. "Reverse teleporters, and yes, they're just as rare and valuable as they sound." Luke took the stones, examining them without much interest. "How do they work?" he asked, more out of politeness. "If you break the one with the raven," Gomez pointed to it, "I teleport to your exact location. The other one with the lightning rune summons Fester. Doesn't matter where we are or what we're doing. We'll be there. Instantly. Remember, for those old demons to bite the bait, my brother and I have to be far from your location. Otherwise, they won't dare show up. So we'll be publicly, visibly far away to lure them out," Gomez explained. They need to believe I'm alone, with no reinforcements," Luke nodded. "Exactly. So if everything goes wrong, if there are more than expected, if one of the older elders shows up, or Edward himself, you need to break those stones immediately. That's the only way we'll get there in time. Without them, there's no chance. Understood? Gomez asked, serious. Understood, Luke repeated. A few hours before leaving for his mission, Luke opened his laptop, ready for a video call with Wednesday. The screen loaded. Instantly, a room appeared, gothic, gloomy, and elegant. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Wednesday Addams stared at him through the camera with her usual expression, unmoving, ink-dark eyes, and a steaming cup of tea between her fingers. That was a record time today. You opened Skype pretty fast, Luke said with that half-smile that always seemed to challenge her. Wednesday looked at him without emotion. Will you keep smiling like it's some kind of victory every time we have a video call? It is a victory. I turned the anti-tech queen into a regular video caller. You should thank me. You're evolving, Luke replied. What I do for tactical efficiency doesn't count as evolution. It's simply a useful tool for maintaining regular reports and for seeing your face, Wednesday replied. She said it like it was just another observation, without hesitation, without apparent emotion, as if she were talking about the weather or the tea's temperature. Does that mean you miss me? Luke asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Wednesday answered plainly. It's been over 2 months since I last saw you. The last time was during winter break, when you were wrapped in bandages and still insisted on training with a broken rib. After that, I returned to Nevermore. You stayed in isolation. It's been exactly 68 days. Luke remembered that time. Because he got distracted for a second less, even, that damn Fester managed to land a brutal hit that broke more than one rib. With all his accumulated fatigue and injuries, even his self-healing couldn't keep up. I miss you too, Luke said at last, honestly. His voice was a little quieter, less teasing. Wednesday watched him closely. How much? She asked. What do you mean how much? Luke asked, confused. Numerically, in what measurable way do you miss me? Wednesday specified, setting her teacup down on the nightstand with elegance. Luke opened his mouth, then closed it. He blinked. I don't know. I don't think that's something you measure. How do you measure how much you miss someone? He asked, puzzled. Wednesday didn't hesitate. I measure it by the number of times I'm about to contact you telepathically through our link. And don't. Luke blinked. She continued calmly, like explaining a formula. On average, I think about reaching out to you 13 to 15 times a day. More if the idiotic teenagers around here irritate me too much. I don't do it because I know you're focused on your training and I respect your boundaries, but I think about it, and I keep count. Luke didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, absorbing the confession. So, you miss me around 13 times a day. 978 times since I returned to Nevermore. As of today, 14.3 on average to be exact, Wednesday corrected. There was a pause. Wednesday narrowed her eyes slightly. Now I want your number, quantitative. No evasions, tell me, she demanded. You're demanding numbers now, Luke asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, tell me. Give me a second. I'm processing, Luke said, briefly closing his eyes. His mind, enhanced by his blue aura, worked with surgical speed. Mental traces, involuntary associations, repeated images of Wednesday's face, impulses to reach out, conscious and unconscious memories. Everything flowed with mathematical precision, and then the answer came. 1,146 times since I last saw you, Luke said, opening his eyes. Wednesday remained completely still. Even the faint steam rising from her teacup seemed to freeze in the air. Daily average of how much? She finally asked, emotionless but with the slightest change in tone, almost imperceptible. 16.8, Luke answered. Wednesday watched him in silence. Not because she doubted the number, she knew Luke didn't lie about these things, but because she hadn't expected someone to think about her more times than she thought about them. And she considered herself obsessed when it came to Luke. I suppose, you win, Wednesday admitted, though the word sounded strange coming from her lips. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intimate. Wednesday spoke again first. About your mission. The plan is functional, but it has dangerous gaps, she said bluntly. Dangerous gaps? I don't think so. If I break the stones, your father and uncle will be ready to fight right away, Luke replied, crossing his arms calmly. Exactly, if you break the stones. But I know you, Luke, Wednesday said. Oh, and what do you think I'll do? Luke asked with a slight smile. You'll try to do it all alone. If more than one shows up, even 3, you'll hold your ground in the fight just to push yourself to the limit. Because you trust your abilities. I know. Ever since you killed Elliot and awakened your 4th aura, you think you're invincible. I remember perfectly what you said when you regained consciousness, Wednesday replied. Luke didn't deny it. He stayed silent, and Wednesday continued without softening her tone. And now that you've been through training with my father, my uncle, and your grandfather, I'm sure your strength has grown. A lot. But so has your confidence. Too much. Luke was about to speak, but Wednesday continued. You've always liked battles, Luke. But now I see something different in you. A certainty that borders on arrogance. As if you truly believe you're the chosen one now. Untouchable. A being above danger. She said it without harshness or reproach. And even if you are, this plan isn't designed for you to show off how much you've progressed. It's not a test. It's not an arena for your ego, Wednesday added. Luke frowned, this time with no trace of a smile. So what is the plan then? He asked, his tone more serious, even slightly dissatisfied. The plan is simple. If the old mans take the bait, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't matter how many. The moment they appear, you activate the stones. My father and uncle arrive, team up, and eliminate them, Wednesday replied. Your father told me there was no need to use the stones if only 1 or 2 showed up. Said it would be good for my training, Luke said, clicking his tongue. Even he considered himself more than enough to kill a demonic old man. Wednesday narrowed her eyes, her expression icy with exasperation. Don't listen to my idiot father. Hey, show a little more respect for your dad, Luke thought. He still thinks this is part of your training, but it's not. We're at war. There's no reason to expose yourself unnecessarily when harder battles are still ahead. I don't want you getting hurt because of my idiot father or because you think you're invincible, Wednesday said. I know what I'm doing, Wednesday. I fought life-or-death battles before I even met you. I'm not some idiot looking to die for validation. I never was, Luke said sharply. I know, Wednesday replied, her tone softer than usual, not as sharp or monotone. But before she could justify her concern or ease the tension, Luke continued. Do you remember a few months ago, when those lesser demons attacked Ajax's mansion during his birthday party? Wednesday didn't respond, but of course she remembered, and she knew exactly why Luke was bringing it up. When I took out the lesser demons, I went to help you and you got furious. You yelled at me for killing your targets, Luke went on, straight to the point. You said you didn't need anyone stepping in, that you knew what you were doing, and now you're doing the exact thing you didn't want me to do. That was different. The lesser demons back then didn't pose a real threat to my life. A demonic old man should never be underestimated, Wednesday justified. To me, he's just another old psychic who hasn't fought in ages and spent years hiding in the shadows. Same as a lesser demon, Luke said, his tone filled with absolute confidence. There was a second of silence. Wednesday pressed her lips together slightly, still watching him. There it is, that absolute confidence, she murmured. Luke heard her, but said nothing. I don't doubt your strength, Luke. I never have. But I care about what happens to you, and if there's a way to reduce the risk of you getting hurt, I want you to take it. Not because I don't trust you, but because I love you. And if I can prevent you from being hurt, I will, Wednesday said, so clear and direct that it caught Luke off guard. It wasn't like it was strange to hear that from Wednesday. She had said it before. She had shown it. But every time she said it like that, with that blend of cold logic and brutal tenderness, it still took him by surprise. Luke took a deep breath. All right, you win. I'll break the stones the moment the first old man shows up, he finally said. He couldn't say no after the concern his beautiful Gothic girlfriend just showed him. "Promise it," said Wednesday. Luke raised an eyebrow, half confused, half amused. "All right, I promise." "You better keep your word. I'll know from my father and uncle if they were teleported to your location. You won't be able to lie to me," Wednesday said, her tone more relaxed now, almost playful. But the warning was still there, as sharp as a dagger's edge. "I swear, I'll follow through. You're the only person who can make me question my battle instincts just by looking at me through a screen," Luke said with a faint smile. "What about you? How's everything going at Nevermore?" Luke asked, changing the subject. "Classes continue. Missions too. The atmosphere is more tense. But the teenagers here remain irritating in every possible way. Nothing I didn't expect," Wednesday replied. "Oh, so you can go on missions and put yourself in danger. But I can't," Luke said, recalling that Wednesday had special permission to leave campus and carry out missions. "What I do isn't comparable to what you're about to do, Luke. My tasks are reconnaissance, infiltration, information gathering. I work with other outcasts, with allies. No one expects me to face a demonic elder alone, and if I ever did, it wouldn't be without backup," Wednesday replied calmly. Luke let out a breath. "I can't win an argument with you today." The conversation then became more relaxed. They talked for a few minutes about Wednesday's day-to-day life, which was far more interesting than Luke's isolated training. And just as Wednesday was finishing a sentence, a sound cut through the video call. It was pop music, bright, catchy, irritatingly cheerful. Luke tilted his head, frowning with a mix of mockery and disbelief. "Wednesday, seriously, pop music? Are you being held hostage? Blink twice if enemy spies kidnapped you." Wednesday's eyes briefly shifted to a point off camera. Then she looked back at him. "I'm sharing a room, that's all." "And you haven't threatened her life yet?" "No, not yet." "And since when do you have a roommate? I thought you had special permission to be alone, you know, like your clearance to leave campus and all that," Luke asked, sounding a bit curious. Wednesday tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and narrowed her eyes slightly. "Some things came up, nothing important. I have to go. Goodbye, remember to break the stones," Wednesday said, ending the call. "What just happened?" Luke wondered from his room, wearing a puzzled expression. Seeing the time, he stretched and got up. It was time to prepare. Wednesday's room. From her bed, Wednesday didn't move for a second. Then she slowly turned her gaze toward the other side of the room. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Hanging lights, pastel-colored pillows, a blanket with a floral print. And in the middle of it all, lying on her side, Enid Sinclair stared at her from her bed with a blank expression, though she didn't look nearly as cheerful as her pop music. "I never thought you'd show that much concern for someone. If color makes you sick, this could be fatal," Enid said in a teasing tone. Wednesday didn't respond right away. She just stared at her with her usual unshakable expression. "You heard the whole conversation?" she finally asked, without raising her voice. Enid nodded. "I suppose someone who runs a gossip blog just can't resist eavesdropping." "Nosy," Wednesday said dryly, with clear intent to offend. "I haven't used my blog in months. You'd know that if you read anything besides ancient books or war reports or whatever," Enid replied, tilting her head. Wednesday didn't respond for a few seconds. She just stared at Enid. Since returning to Nevermore after winter break, Wednesday had kept a double schedule, classes and missions. She knew the war was silent but active, full of infiltrated enemies, questionable alliances, and covered-up deaths. And Enid Sinclair, to her surprise, had kept her word. She hadn't approached Luke, hadn't sought contact, but she'd been useful, extremely useful. She offered herself as an ally in the war and delivered without hesitation. Wednesday had seen her take down hooded attackers on 2 separate missions, ruthlessly, fearlessly, with a precision she didn't typically associate with a girl who used to sing pop songs when she woke up. The werewolf girl's efficiency had convinced her. There were many people at Nevermore whose loyalty was questionable. Some pretended to be neutral. Others secretly sympathized with the Spellmans. Trust was hard to come by. The number of neutral parties and potential enemies was higher than she and Luke had initially thought, even at a school like Nevermore, which was far more lenient toward normies. But Enid was loyal, for obvious reasons. The obsession Wednesday knew all too well in Enid for Luke guaranteed she'd never betray him. Her loyalty was assured, even if it came from an uncomfortable place. That's why Wednesday had decided they would share a room again, for efficiency, for strategy, and because, deep down, she trusted Enid more than most. Sharing a room again had been strange. At first, they barely spoke. They rotated schedules, exchanged reports, planned missions, everything was tactical. But over the weeks, something else had crept back in. Not friendship, but familiarity. They weren't friends like before. But they weren't strangers either. "Does it bother you that I heard everything? I love you, Luke. Please come back safe. Don't fight. Don't get hurt. I need your eternal love." "How sweet, Wednesday," Enid said in a teasing tone. "Should I reactivate my blog and write about it? Everyone would be shocked to learn the Ice Queen is such a softie," she added. Wednesday looked at her with an unshaken expression. Over the past few months, the werewolf girl had become much sharper than before. Not just with her, Wednesday had noticed it in class too. Enid was still outgoing, cheerful, enthusiastic, but there was something new in her now, a sharp edge. In the past, Enid avoided confrontation, neither verbal nor physical. But now she was different. If someone challenged her, she responded. Even with Bianca, someone Enid once admired or feared, Nevermore's self-proclaimed queen bee. In fact, Bianca now avoided her during certain training sessions, and she wasn't the only one. Some students, especially in physical combat classes, were starting to fear her. Enid didn't hold back. She had developed an intensity that bordered on feral. She moved with precision, with ferocity, and when she was angry or in a bad mood, it showed. She had earned both respect and fear. "Jealous?" Wednesday asked with a clearly provocative look. The word dropped like a weight, direct, hitting exactly where it hurt. Enid's smug smile vanished in an instant, her eyes surprised, caught off guard, almost hurt. She hadn't expected Wednesday to strike there, especially after admitting she was being sappy, only to counterattack with surgical precision. Enid clicked her tongue, frustrated. "You're not as good at arguments as you think," she muttered, though not even she believed it. She turned over in bed, giving Wednesday her back. Wednesday watched her for a few more seconds, dark eyes, expression unchanging. But beneath that mask, a tiny smile appeared, barely perceptible. She had won the argument, as usual, with everyone except one person, Luke. He was the only one who could truly challenge her, who didn't flinch at her sharpness or crumble under her precision. The only one with whom her arguments didn't always end in victory. But even he had yielded today. Luke was flying toward the border between Ohio and Pennsylvania. He had made a slight change of plans. Before offering himself as bait, he would recover his family's sole weapon. It made much more sense to secure it first and fight with it in his possession. Besides, it would be a good opportunity to get familiar with the weapon and start testing it in real combat. The distance from New York was around 600 to 700 kilometers. Thanks to his recent training, his flying speed had improved significantly. Thus, over the course of a single night, having left Adam's manor in secret, he managed to reach his destination, guided by Edgar. It was nighttime. The air had a dry, strange smell, and the silence was absolute. "We're close," said Edgar, appearing by his side like a translucent shadow, floating along with him. His glow was dimmer than ever. Luke descended gently, landing on what seemed to have once been a road, or what remained of it. Cracks ran across it in every direction, and from some of them, a faint white vapor rose like threads of smoke. Just a few meters away, a rusted, twisted sign resisted the passage of time. "Centralia," Luke read the sign. Then he looked back at the road where he had landed. It was devastated, as if an earthquake had hit, but it didn't feel like that. The white vapor rising from the cracks suggested something else. Welcome to Hell 666, Luke thought, reading a chalk inscription on part of the road. The name meant nothing to him. Curious, he pulled out his phone and looked it up. The first thing that appeared was a Wikipedia article. Centralia, Pennsylvania, is a ghost town. The place was evacuated due to an underground fire that began in 1962 and still burns to this day. The fire was caused by an accident in a landfill located over a coal vein. For decades, the heat and carbon monoxide made it impossible to live there. The coal seam continues to burn, and experts say it could do so for another 250 years. The only signs of the fire, which burns 1,600 meters below the surface, are some underground vents that expel smoke to the south of the municipality. Other sources of smoke and vapor come from an abandoned stretch of State Route 61, which was closed in the 1990s after several surface cracks appeared, as well as in the area around the cemetery and other surrounding zones. Luke let out a low whistle after reading it and sharing the info with Edgar. Wednesday would love the story behind this place. She probably already knows about it, he thought. Luke, guided by Edgar, walked along the road at a steady pace, almost as if sightseeing. A nice little expedition after so much time locked away, training nonstop. The contrast between the ghostly silence of the place and the usual buzz of his routine was almost pleasant. He scanned the surroundings, twisted trees, leaning poles, remnants of houses choked by overgrowth. Everything carried a desolate, almost unreal aura. All because of a coal mine fire, Luke muttered. Don't believe that entirely, Edgar said, and Luke raised an eyebrow, waiting for an explanation. I heard some rumors a while ago, back in 1962, when I was training your father's father, your grandfather. Something happened here in 1962, something involving outcasts. Not a coal mine or a simple fire, said Edgar. Oh, a battle. Edgar nodded. Yes, I don't know the sides or the reasons. It wasn't my business, but it's not as simple as the normie government makes it seem. Luke looked around, watching the vapor rising from the cracks in the road. So the normie government covered it up. Exactly, Edgar confirmed. Luke lowered his gaze, thoughtful. He had experienced a similar situation firsthand. His battle in Sunnyvale against Elliot had brought death and destruction to the town. Over 1,000 normies dead, millions in structural damages, and the whole thing had been disguised by the government as a natural disaster. He had long since discovered that, at the highest levels of political power, there were normies who were fully aware of the existence of outcasts. They had known for generations. They had simply decided it was better to keep it hidden from the public eye. Vampires, werewolves, psychics, normies, all sharing the same country in a fragile peace. Some didn't want trouble, living within their own circles. Others, like Elliot, wanted to assert their superiority through bloodshed. Do you think it was that same division of the normie government that covered this up too? Luke asked. If he hadn't lost consciousness in Sunnyvale, he might have met the normie secret agents who handled the cover-up. Naturally, the incident created tension between both worlds, the outcast and the normie. As always, the normies went on high alert. They feared Sunnyvale was the beginning of something bigger, a war, a rebellion, a fracture in the fragile coexistence. They knew that, even though the outcasts were few, if they ever decided to unite and strike, the damage would be catastrophic. But an agreement was reached. In part, thanks to Gomez, a prominent figure in the outcast world due to his psychic lineage, power, and influence, but also respected and feared in the normie world because of his political connections and vast fortune. His intervention, along with the Adams family's extensive resources, was what prevented the incident from escalating further. Gomez calmed the waters, pulled the necessary strings, and the incident was covered up, like so many others before it. The truce held. Despite everything, the normies didn't want a war. They knew that an open conflict would mean hell on earth, but they didn't fully trust the passivity of the outcasts either. The fear was always there, latent. Despite the horror of Sunnyvale, they understood it was an internal conflict. not a deliberate attack against their kind. The outcasts didn't want an all-out war either, except for the Spellmans, whose primary goal was war and his secret allies. But they hadn't been able to act yet, as many other outcast factions were hunting them down to eliminate them and their allies. The outcasts knew their population was small. Despite their extraordinary gifts, they were vastly outnumbered. Normies, though lacking supernatural powers, had millions of soldiers, advanced technology, chemical and biological weapons, cutting-edge military equipment, even nuclear bombs. On the other hand, the normies also understood the real danger. Because the outcasts weren't just brute strength or isolated individuals with strange talents. They knew that a high-level psychic could kill thousands with ease. That a single vampire could throw an entire city into chaos if left unchecked. But the most unsettling part was what they didn't understand. What normies feared in silence was the hidden knowledge, the methods that defied their scientific logic. Psychics capable of manipulating minds, rewriting memories, inducing emotions, and breaking wills. Vampires who used ancient techniques of hypnosis, blood control, and unknown enchantments. Shapeshifters impossible to track, siren songs capable of triggering mass suicides. Each species with its own way of disrupting the established order, and on top of that, witchcraft, ancient grimoires, and more. Seen from that perspective, maybe the normies should be grateful that most outcasts don't seek world domination. That they don't aim to reduce humanity to mindless slaves or turn cities into blood farms. That, deep down, most just want to live in their own world, far from mass hysteria and the normie system, or even live within it without causing chaos. That's why normies cover up supernatural incidents, not out of ignorance, but out of fear, out of pragmatism. They'd rather cover up a massacre caused by outcasts with headlines like earthquake or chemical accident than declare a war they know they can't fully win, and one that could be disastrous. It's a fragile and precarious balance, but one where, for now, the edge slightly tilts toward the outcasts. Edgar floated silently at his side. Then he nodded. Yes, from what I know, it's a secret division of the government, specialized in the supernatural. Outcasts, strange creatures, monsters, everything that doesn't fit into their orderly world. I know they exist, and they're very well funded. Don't underestimate them just because they're normies, he added, glancing sideways at Luke. I'm not an expert in their structure, of course. Back in my day, I didn't care much about normies, but over the years, I've learned a few things. Luke listened closely. They're not as weak as they seem individually. Their advantage isn't just technology, weapons, or numbers. They also have people among them who aren't fully normie, Edgar continued. Hybrids, Luke asked. Exactly. Children of normies and outcasts who were brought to their side and awakened outcast genes. Don't expect to see psychics. We're extremely rare and born only into very specific bloodlines, but you might see gorgons, werewolves, and the like, Edgar confirmed with a nod. Still, they can't be that powerful. Their nukes are more dangerous, Luke muttered. After all, they were still hybrids, and most of the time, they only inherited one gene, which meant they might not even have powers. And even if they did, they'd still be weak, at least compared to him. A psychic with 4 auras. Not everyone can be a Poe, and definitely not one like you, said Edgar. Thanks for the compliment, Luke replied sincerely. Edgar smiled and said nothing more. They kept moving until they reached the center of Centralia. Broken streets, abandoned houses overtaken by vegetation, empty windows like blind eyes. A low mist covered everything, drifting as if it were breathing. What is this? Silent Hill. Maybe it was inspired by this place, Luke thought, surveying the area. After that, he expanded his domain, a field of perception that stretched for several kilometers, cutting through matter, structures, terrain, even underground layers. And finally, he sensed it. A presence with an ancient, heavy pressure. Silent, yet alive. As if a consciousness lay dormant beneath the earth, breathless, motionless, but aware. over 1,600 meters deep. "I found the weapon," Luke said. The mist stirred slightly as Luke took a few steps into the abandoned town. He could feel the weapon's presence. Motionless, yet to his surprise, he sensed a faint connection. As if the weapon was calling to him, not like a voice, not like a thought, but like a pulse, a subtle tide of energy that seemed to link with him, something that recognized his bloodline. "It's normal for you to have a connection," said Edgar when Luke told him about it. "Yeah," Luke muttered, his eyes fixed on the cracked ground. When he expanded his domain almost completely, he not only sensed the weapon's presence, he also felt human ones. A large number of them, hidden inside a building that, unlike the rest, had been restored. Trained bodies, steady heartbeats, constant communication through earpieces. Two hybrids, Luke thought without much interest. But something else caught a bit more of his attention. In that same building, in an isolated room, there was a strange presence. An outcast or a monster, Luke wondered, raising a brow. He knew they had to be normie government personnel trained to handle supernatural threats, possibly part of the same secret division that had covered up what happened in Sunnyvale. And they had clearly seen him. Falling from the sky wasn't exactly discreet, especially if they had the whole town under surveillance. But he wouldn't bother making contact with them. Recovering the weapon was the priority. He turned his gaze back to the ground and flexed his fingers slightly. Slabs of concrete and sheets of stone began to shift, pulled apart by an invisible force. The old cracks that ran through Centralia, opened decades ago by underground fire and neglect, now widened, stretched further by his telekinesis. One of them, the deepest one, opened right beneath his feet. A black hole that looked like it could swallow the world. "I'm coming," thought Luke, before stepping forward and letting himself fall into the void. The descent was long, silent. But as he fell, the temperature began to rise, at first mildly, then searing, then unbearable. The walls of the abyss were lined with glowing veins of coal, like roots of lava. The air was toxic, thick with carbon monoxide and suspended ash. "Looks like hell," Luke thought as he landed hard on a cracked rocky surface. All around him, everything was burning. Rivers of fire flowed through the fissures in the ground. The heat warped the air. Columns of smoke rose from natural chimneys, as if the earth itself were breathing. Of course, he had already created a telekinetic barrier around himself, an invisible dome that completely shielded him from gas, flames, and pressure. The fire veered away from his path, as if crashing against impenetrable glass. Luke walked forward, firm and focused, wasting no time. Underground surveillance base, 2 km north of Centralia. The screens flickered in an endless row, thermal, infrared, optical. A swarm of headset-wearing operators typed away non-stop as the sensors streamed real-time data. Active fissures, minor tremors, underground gas, nothing new. Until a red alert broke the routine. Descending object detected. Anomalous speed. "What was that?" said one of the technicians. "It looked human." "Zoom in," ordered a middle-aged man with a serious expression as he stepped forward. The screen displayed a figure falling from the sky with perfect control. The body stabilized, rotated slightly, and landed softly among the rubble and mist. "Facial recognition," asked the same man. His name was Jack Rourke, head of the surveillance base. Tall, short gray hair, light eyes. His mere presence was enough to lower the volume in the entire room. "In progress, got it. Confirmed. Luke Poe, male, 16 years old. Nationality, American. Status, highly dangerous. Direct descendant of the Poe family, one of the oldest psychic bloodlines on our continent." Silence. Two figures stepped forward from the back of the room. The first was Evelyn, dark green hair tied in a high ponytail, black wrinkle-free uniform, glasses with special lenses. Her presence was cold, surgical. She was a hybrid Gorgon. "The kid from Sunnyvale, the one with 3 auras," Evelyn murmured. The second was Marcus, broad torso, over 63, jacket open, unruly hair, crooked grin. His grayish skin and dark eyes made it clear he wasn't a normal human. Wolf hybrid. "I thought 3-aura users were just myths," said Marcus. "They're not," Jack replied. "In the history of psychics, there are a few extremely rare cases of 3-aura users." Marcus whistled softly, grinning. "What's a monster like him doing here?" "You think he knows?" asked Evelyn, turning to Jack. "No, that would be impossible. Not a single outcast has suspected the incident in Centralia for over 50 years, Jack replied, shaking his head. "There's no way he knows," he added, crossing his arms. "No signs, no spies, no leaks." But before he could continue, the image on the screen changed. Luke looked up. For a moment, his eyes stared directly into the camera. It wasn't a random glance. It was a deliberate look, as if he knew he was being watched. Evelyn held her breath. Marcus stopped smiling, but Luke lowered his gaze right after. With a slight movement of his fingers, the earth began to split open. Chunks of concrete floated like foam in the air. Old cracks widened further. The ground crumbled before him effortlessly. And Luke descended, without looking back. "He's not here for the Wendigo," Jack said with a faint sigh as he watched Luke's actions. "Whatever he's after, it has nothing to do with us." "And we're just going to let him?" asked Evelyn. Jack nodded. "Yes, we're not going to provoke him. If he came to retrieve something, let him have it." Forests of eastern Pennsylvania, 20 km from Centralia. A creature over 4 meters tall sprinted through the forest with agility and blinding speed. Each step left deep marks in the damp earth. Birds fled, animals hid. The entire forest seemed to sense it and recoil from its presence. Its skin was dark purple, dense and hardened over its arms, shoulders, and head like a living carapace. Its abdomen and torso were a lighter gray, grotesquely defined with symmetrical musculature, covered by external bone plates that locked together like a natural armor. Its head was its strangest feature, elongated backward, as if part of its deformed skull extended into a hardened, mushroom-shaped crest. Its eyes, 2 glowing red orbs, burned with hunger and intelligence. Behind it, floating just a few meters above the ground, followed a much smaller figure, but no less dangerous. Its flight speed was just as fast as the beast's. An old man, his skin as thin as paper, but his eyes brimming with malice. He wore a black cloak trimmed with red, carried a curved staff etched with ancient symbols, and wore a pendant made from an unrecognizable material. "Do you smell it, Zarvok?" asked the old man in a rough, time-worn voice. The beast growled. "Of course I smell it, old man." So the Poe whelp finally left his den. Even if he snuck out, he surely didn't expect to be detected so quickly. Foolish boy, arrogant, like all the Poes, thought the old man, a toothless grin spreading across his face. Zarvok followed the scent like a hunting beast, eyes narrowed, muscles tense with excitement. But then, just 3 kilometers from Centralia, Zarvok came to a sudden stop. His legs slammed into the ground with a dull thud. He closed his eyes and sniffed, once, twice, a third time slower. "What is it?" asked the old man, turning slightly in the air, his patience thin. Zarvok didn't answer right away. Then suddenly, his eyes snapped open. A wide, inhuman grin spread across his deformed face, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. "A Wendigo, young but pure. I've only encountered 2 Wendigos in over 300 years of life. This is the 3rd. I've never tasted their souls," said Zarvok, his long, dark tongue sliding slowly across his teeth. The old man was visibly surprised to hear there was a Wendigo. Even for him, one of the oldest psychics in the outcast world, that word carried weight. They were rare, difficult to classify. Monsters, outcasts, both. Creatures capable of reason, if they survived themselves. Most succumbed to their instincts. Those few who retained consciousness were rarer still than psychics. "Are you certain?" he murmured, intrigued for the first time. Zarvok nodded, his eyes bloodshot with excitement. And it's young, it won't be strong enough, it won't escape, and I'll finally get to devour its soul. With a low growl, Zarvok resumed his charge, driven by a renewed fury, as if the scent of the Wendigo now pulled him even more than Luke's trail. Deep beneath the earth, Luke continued descending through the levels of the collapsed mines. The atmosphere was oppressive, but his telekinetic field kept him isolated and unharmed. He walked among the ruins of forgotten tunnels and structures collapsed by the underground fire, guided by his domain that allowed him to see the weapon. He was getting closer and closer to it. Luke's steps grew slower as he approached the weapon. "Come on, hurry up. Why so slow?" echoed Edgar's voice, floating beside him. His spectral silhouette flickered at times, as if the weapon's proximity was affecting his presence. Luke turned his head to look at Edgar. "I was observing the scenery," he replied in a neutral tone. Then, after a few seconds of silence, began walking again at a slightly faster pace, though not by much. These were the last minutes they would share together. Luke knew it, so did Edgar. Once they were in front of the weapon, Edgar would cease to exist as a conscious presence. He wouldn't be trapped or imprisoned. He would merge with the weapon. His soul would become part of the legacy the weapon represented. Though soul weapons are considered sentient entities due to the number of souls sealed within them, that didn't mean Edgar would be able to speak with Luke or appear like a ghost. It didn't work that way. Luke turned into a narrower passageway until he reached a natural cavity. And finally, he saw it, about 10 meters away. The rock, blackened by centuries of heat, rose in the center of the chamber like a kind of natural, improvised altar. And embedded in that rock was the weapon. A sword. Its blade was long, dark, and slightly curved, similar to a katana. In the center of the blade, a channel was engraved with ancient runes that emitted a faint glow. The hilt was matte black, made of reinforced polymer with tanned leather inlays and old spiral engravings. It had a small crossguard shaped like a pair of sharp wings, useful for deflecting attacks without losing mobility. Edgar had already explained all of this before. "Its name is Eclipse," Luke murmured as he approached the sword embedded in the rock, as if it were the mythical sword of King Arthur. The name wasn't just for show. It came from the blade's dark edge, a dense blackness that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Beside him, Edgar floated, staring at the blade for a moment, then spoke. "You already know, but I'll say it again in case you're still pretending not to," he said, not softening his tone. "When I merge with the weapon, you must strengthen the bond so it fully recognizes you. It's already connected to you, but it needs your blood." Luke nodded. "Just drop a few drops of blood onto the hilt. That'll be enough. After that, the weapon will know for certain that you're the heir," Edgar said. "I'm the only one left. Not much to recognize," said Luke, turning his eyes from the weapon to Edgar. "Yeah, I know, but it's necessary," Edgar replied with a faint smile. "Well, I guess this is goodbye," Edgar said, taking his eyes off the weapon and focusing them on Luke. He felt the weapon's call like a constant, firm pull. The fusion was almost complete. It had been slowly binding for months, just enough to avoid fatting completely, but there was no more time left. The bond was about to close. "Yes," said Luke, without taking his eyes off the weapon. "This would be the moment when I say something deep, something to inspire you, change your life," Edgar said, pausing briefly. "But I'm not going to. That's not my style." "Good. I don't like emotional goodbyes either," Luke replied, glancing at Edgar. "Still, I think the moment calls for it," said Edgar, a teasing smile forming on his face. "Damn old man, don't change your mind so fast," Luke thought. "I never imagined you'd make it this far. Not because I doubted you, but because of your circumstances. You were walking a tightrope. You had no foundation, no environment, no protection like your father, your grandfather, and the other heirs. You were born in hiding, raised by Natasha, and found me when you were 14, Edgar began. And still, against all odds, you went further than any of them. You exposed the Spellmans to everyone. You turned them into public enemies. And more than that, the outcast world will finally remember who we are." that the Poes still exist, that we're one of the 6 great families, and that our heir is the most talented in the history of our continent," Edgar said, lowering his voice slightly, though the pride in it was impossible to hide. "No in the world. 4 auras. Not even I saw that coming." Edgar corrected himself with a laugh, that eerie, half-chilling laugh of his. When the laughter faded, he went on. "I'm proud of you, Luke. We'll see each other again. A long time from now. When you die of old age, you'll sit with me and tell me how you rebuilt the bloodline, about your children, what you did with the Poes." Luke remained silent, standing tall, his jaw clenched. He couldn't stop it. A single tear escaped, sliding down his cheek. Edgar saw it and needed no more. He knew Luke well enough to understand that this gesture said more than any goodbye. And without another word, Edgar stepped forward. His already faint spectral form dissolved into ethereal particles, which were gently absorbed by the sword in a motion almost ritualistic. There were no flashes, no tremors, as if it had always been meant to be. Luke was alone, surrounded by the echo of silence and the glow of burning coal that seeped through the cracks in the ground and the walls. He felt a strange emptiness. Without another word, he slowly approached Eclipse. He raised his right hand and created a wide telekinetic dome that enveloped him completely. The heat, smoke, and burning particles were instantly pushed away. Inside the bubble, the air was clear and clean. It was just him and the weapon. On his index finger, he focused a fine layer of telekinetic waves, so precise they formed an invisible edge. He made a small incision in the palm of his right hand, nothing excessive, just enough. A few drops of blood fell onto the sword's hilt, and the reaction was immediate. The runes vibrated. Before any more blood could spill, the wound closed completely. A faint green glow covered his skin. His healing aura had kicked in instinctively. Luke wrapped his hand around the hilt and pulled the sword. Eclipse slid out effortlessly, and in that exact moment, it unleashed a powerful burst of energy. It was pure pressure, condensed and released like a long-held breath, the exhale of something that had waited for years. The stone beneath his feet cracked. The veins of coal around him dimmed for a moment. But Luke wasn't harmed. The energy surrounded him and recognized him. His bond with the weapon was now final. It acknowledged him as the heir and head of the family. And yet, Luke's expression didn't change. There was no ecstasy from claiming the sole weapon, no relief. Any young heir chosen by such a weapon, declared leader of their family, would likely be overjoyed, but not Luke. His brow was furrowed, his expression tense. His mood was dark. He lifted his gaze toward the cracked ceiling of the mines. With his expanded domain, he saw beyond. He sensed presences and clashes of energy. There were enemies on the surface. 2 factions were battling. He knew one of the factions belonged to the normies he had sensed earlier. The other side were undoubtedly enemies. A psychic, most likely a spellman, since he was accompanied by a demon. Luke could recognize demons now, ever since his encounter with the lesser demons back at Petropolis Manor. And he didn't care how they had found him so quickly. He only knew one thing: they were here for him. And deep down, that brought him relief, because now he had somewhere to unload everything he was feeling. Luke tightened his grip on the sword, and Eclipse responded. Along the blade, telekinetic waves began to condense at a faster rate than ever before. Denser, more precise. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.